right, good morning, YouTube. Welcome to another edition of Theology Reader's Breakfast. I'm going to get started here and make sure Instagram is able to connect in live. And nope, it's not working. There we go. All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another rendition of our Theology Reader's Breakfast here at Greenbelt Baptist Church. Reading through John Owen and his book, The Glory of Christ, and we're reading through the Puritan paperback version. The original is a little bit thicker. I've got here actually volume 13 of Owen's works, which has a number of different little treatises and works in there. The first of these is The Duty of Pastors and People Distinguished. So what makes a pastor, and what are the duties of the people within a congregation, lay people, and how do we minister to one another. I thought this was just a fantastic look at that. But what I love about this volume, volume 13, is that near the end, there's collected here a bunch of little works, one a letter, one a little essay on tolerance, on religious tolerance and religious liberty, and how to coexist within a society that has different convictions on religious issues. Now, Owen is writing during the 1700s, and a lot of these essays are coming during the late 1600s, at a very tumultuous time in English history, just coming out of the English Civil Wars. 10 years before writing some of these, King Charles I had been beheaded, and there were a number of laws put into place through a Presbyterian-led Westminster Assembly that restricted any religious dissent. People like Baptists or Congregationalists, of whom John Owen found himself more and more in line with. And so he's writing to say, hey, look, let's not go from one extreme to the other. We need to find a sense of balance and a sense of liberty that allows for an expression of conscience on different convictions. And whether we agree with every jot and tittle that Owen comes down on, nonetheless, I think that this is very helpful. So this is volume 13 of John Owen's works. The title of the actual volume is Ministry and Fellowship, but at the end are just some great insights on how Christians can think through liberty of conscience, religious tolerance, something I think we're thinking more and more through in our own day and age. So maybe we can look more at that later in future sessions. Now we return to our reading of his book, The Glory of Christ. The Glory of Christ. And we're in chapter 4. So I'm going to pick back up on chapter 4. Hey, we've got some people chimed in here. I see you, Phil. And Mary Jean, good to see you. So if you've got the book, I'm starting on page 38. This is from Puritan pastor and theologian John Owen. The title of chapter 4, The Glory of Christ's Humbling Himself. Paul tells us there is one God and one mediator between God and man, and that is the man Christ Jesus. 1 Timothy 2:5. In that great separation between God and man, caused by our sin and our apostasy, which of itself could result in nothing but the utter ruin of the whole human race, there was none in heaven or earth who was fit or able to reconcile heaven and earth and bring about a righteous peace between the two. Yet this must be done and could be done only through a suitable mediator. This mediator could not be God himself as only God, for a mediator does not mediate for only one. But if he was God, then he could be said to be biased, for there is only one God, and man is not God. Man needs a mediator to represent him, just as God needs a mediator to represent him, Galatians 3:20. So whatever God might do in the work of reconciliation, yet as God, singular, merely God, he could not do it as mediator. Now as for man, there was no creature in heaven or earth fit to undertake this work. For if one sins against another, God will judge him. But if a man sins against the Lord, who's going to intercede for him? 1 Samuel 2:25. Just as Job tells us, Job 9:33, nor is there any mediator between us who may lay his hand on us. In this state of things, the Lord Christ, as the Son of God, said, behold, I have come to do your will, O God. Hebrews 10:7. By taking our nature into union with himself in his own divine person, he became in every way fit and able for this work, and so undertakes it. How then may we behold the glory of Christ as mediator? We behold it in his humbling himself to take up this office as mediator, in his carrying it out and in its results. So just a quick recap there. All Owen is doing is saying, look, in order for there to be reconciliation between divinity and humanity, between the transcendent divine God who is perfect in his being, and then fallen, fallible humans who are imperfect in our fallenness, we need someone who can represent fully and perfectly both the divine and the fallible and the human. And the glory of Jesus Christ is seen that he alone has taken on that mediatorship, that mediator calling, where he is both God and man. Owen continues, we may behold the glory of Christ in his infinite willingness to humble himself, to take this office as mediator on himself, and uniting our nature to his for that purpose. He did not become a mediator by chance, nor was it imposed on him against his will. He did not have to become mediator. He freely chose to become mediator. He willingly humbled himself in order that he might make a righteous peace between God the judge and man the sinner. Christ, being in the form of God, says Paul, willingly took on himself the form of a servant. He willingly humbled himself. He willingly made himself of no reputation and was obedient even to death on a cross. Philippians 2:5-8. It is this willingness to humble himself, to take our nature into union with himself, which is glorious in the eyes of believers. He's having us here, Owen is having us just think through the theology of the Son of God's incarnation. He's just laying out a theology of how the Son of God became man, and Jesus was perfect God and perfect man. And in thinking through that and believing that, we are, in a sense, by faith, beholding the glory of Christ. He's introducing us to the beauty of who Jesus is for us in his mediatorship. Such is the transcendent glory of the divine nature, that it is said of God that he dwells on high and yet humbles himself to behold the things that are in the heavens and in the earth. Psalm 113, verses 4-6. God is willing to take notice of the most glorious things in heaven and the lowliest things in the earth. This shows his infinite humility. Consider the infinite distance between God's essence, nature, or being, and that of his creatures. So all nations before him are as the drop of a bucket and are counted as the small dust of the balance. Indeed, they are as nothing. They are counted to him as less than nothing and foolishness. Who can measure the distance between that which is infinite and that which is finite? It cannot be done. So the infinite, essential greatness of the nature of God with his infinite distance from the nature of all creatures means that God has to humble himself to take notice of things infinitely below him. we often, I think this is a fair statement, we often think of God, or we have a propensity to think of God in terms of finite, fallible humanity. We only have a perception through our own existence. We're finite beings, and so it's darn near impossible to get a full right grasp of the infinite nature of God from our finite perspective. Owen's bringing up here just the transcendent chasm that exists between who and what God is in his infinite, eternal, perfect being. A God who has always been, a God who is in and of himself simple and finds no beginning, has no end, finds himself in need of nothing, has nothing that contributed to who he is or his happiness. God is divine perfection, right? As earlier writers would say, if God were a circle, his center is everywhere and his circumference is nowhere, right? He's infinite in his being. Where was God before he created everything? I think the right answer is nowhere. Not in the sense that he didn't exist, but in the sense that he is outside of space and time, right? So when you ask, where was God before he created the heavens and the earth? The answer was, there is no space. God created that. There was just God. He's infinitely transcendent of all time and all space. And that is profoundly beyond our finite conceptual ability. And so Owen's just bringing in the wonderful, glorious truth that God, in his infinite perfection, has humbled himself to not only observe our finite world, a finite world that he's beautifully created, but here's the staggering bit: participate in it. That the infinite Son of God participated in a finite way in our world in order to reunite fallen finite creatures, rebels, to an infinitely perfect God. Oh my goodness. What profound, majestic, mysterious beauty. And Owen is just inviting us to stop and think about how wildly gracious it is that God has done that. Phil chimes in and says God was. I'm not sure what you're referring to, but maybe you're correcting something I misspoke, and if so, I thank you for that, brother. Well, Owen continues. God is so infinitely high and lofty, so inhabits eternity in his own eternal being, that it is an act of mere grace in him to take notice of things infinitely below him. Right? He's kind of poking at our modern Jesus is my homeboy mentality, right? He's jabbing at our modern proclivity to think of God as someone like me, just better, right? God is a person, but just really powerful, like really wise. No. God is vastly different than we could ever get our minds and hearts around. And yet what wonderful grace that in his perfection he has come to dwell with finite, broken creatures. Therefore, he does it in a special way, says Owen. He does it by taking special notice of those whom the world despises, the humble and the contrite ones, Isaiah 57:15. God is infinitely self-sufficient, both in himself and in all that he does. Man is continually seeking for self-satisfaction, but no creature can find eternal blessedness or satisfaction in itself, for no creature is self-sufficient. Not even Christ's human nature in heaven is self-sufficient. It lives in God and God in it. It continues to exist in full dependence on God and continually receives blessed and glorious communications from him. God alone lacks nothing and stands in need of nothing. Nothing can be added to him to increase his blessedness, seeing he gives to all life, breath, and all things. No creature can contribute one mite to God's eternal blessedness. He is infinitely perfect and infinitely perfect in his happiness and in his own nature. Again, these are just staggering thoughts that we don't find too often these days. That there's nothing we can do, nothing we can contribute that adds to who God is, adds to his happiness. Even our worship. Yes, the Lord commands it, and the Lord is pleased in it. But even our worship isn't adding to God's happiness. No, God works in us to worship. Our worship is actually reliant upon his grace. Pastors ought to begin their worship services by going to God and say, Lord, help us now to find our happiness in you and guide us in our worship. Not, here we are, God, to add something so that you're happy this Lord's Day. The Lord's Day is more for our finding our happiness in him. God is happy, infinitely happy in and of himself. Phil chimes in again and says, I was agreeing with you, brother. God was from all eternity. That's right. You mentioned where was God before creation. I'm saying God was everything before he created. Absolutely right. What's his name that he reveals to Moses? I am. I am that I am. He was showing himself to Moses as a burning bush, a fire in a bush, and yet the bush was not consumed. And God himself, just like the fire, did not need the bush to be a fire. Usually fire consumes something. Fires only exist insofar as there's something to burn up and consume. A fire needs consumable energy. Well, that fire didn't consume the bush, and that's showing us that God is in need of nothing. He just is. He is. It's a profoundly beautiful truth. How glorious then is this willingness of the Son of God to humble himself to be our mediator. What heart can conceive, what tongue can express the glory of that mind of Christ which brought him down from infinite glory to take our nature into union with his, so that he could mediate with God on our behalf. Owen says, in order to behold the glory of Christ as mediator better, let us consider the special nature of this willingness of his to humble himself. And in doing this, we must first consider what he did not do. We must first consider what he did not do when he humbled himself to be our mediator. There are 3 things here that Owen wants us... Nope, I'm sorry. 5 things here that Owen wants us to consider that what Jesus did not do in humbling himself. First, Christ did not lay aside his divine nature. He did not cease to be God when he became man. The real glory of his willingness to humble himself lies in this great truth that, quote, being in the form of God, he did not consider it robbery to be equal with God. Philippians 2:6. That is, being really and essentially God in his divine nature, he declared himself to be equal with God, or with the person of the Father. He was in the form of God. That is, he was God. He was partaker of the divine nature. For God has no form or shape. So he was equal with God in authority, in dignity, and in power. Because he was in the form of God, he must be equal with God. For though there is order in the divine persons, there is no inequality in the divine being. So the Father is fully God. The Son is fully God. The Holy Spirit is fully God. And there's not an order in terms of... Let me rephrase this carefully. There is an order and a taxis, but there is no inequality. There is not any layering of authority within the Godhead. There is a taxis and an ordering of relationship, so that the Son is the Son of the Father, and the Spirit is the Spirit of the Father and the Son. But each 3 of those persons are fully God. Fully God. And and we believe in one God. And so Owen is just walking us through that kind of classical Orthodox statement. So the Jews clearly understood this meaning when he said God was his Father. They knew he meant that he was equal with God. For when he said this, he also claimed equal power with the Father in all of his divine works. John 5:17, Jesus says, "My Father has been working until now, and I have been working." He equates himself as equal with the Father. Being in the form of God, he took the form of a servant and was found in fashion as a man. Philippians 2:7. This is his infinite humility. Paul does not say that he stopped being God, but though continuing to be God, he took the form of a servant. That is, he took our nature upon him. He became what he was not, but he did not cease to be what he always was. See John 3:13. Although he was then on earth as Son of Man, yet he was still God. For in his divine nature, he was still also in heaven. Again, in becoming a man, he gave up nothing. He gave up nothing in his full divinity. He veiled his divinity. But at no point can the divine nature cease to be divine, right? So Jesus as God was always in his divine nature fully omnipotent, fully omniscient, fully omnipresent. God, right, to be God means that you are unchangeable. God can't change. You can't grow. God can't get better or get wiser. He's outside of time, and he's always been perfect. To presume that God can somehow grow or change means that there was something he changed from. So if he gets better, that means he got better from something that was imperfect. And if you're imperfect, you can't be God. If he changes to be less better, well then he's not God. So a kind of baseline definition of what it means to be God, to be divine, means that you're eternally perfect and cannot change at all. At all. And so when the Son became a man, he took on humanity, but that didn't change in any way his divinity. He was always fully divine. Owen continues, and I'll end here. He who is God can never not be God, just as he who is not God can never be God. The difference between us and the Socinians, that's a kind of older heresy that believed that the Son of God was not divine. The difference between us and the Socinians is this, that we believe that Christ, being God, was made man for our sakes, whereas they teach that Christ, being only man, was made a God for his own sake. That's something similar to the modern heresy of Mormonism. So the Mormons would say, no. Jesus wasn't fully divine. He was just an angel, and then he kind of took on humanity. But he became a God, lowercase g. We would say, no. Then there's no mediation. There's no reconciliation between the infinite perfect God and finite broken humans. Jesus is perfect God and took on fallible humanity. Owen ends his first point then this way. This then is the glory of Christ's willingness to humble himself. This is the life and soul of all heavenly truth and all heavenly mysteries, namely that the Son of God, becoming in time what he was not, that is, Son of Man, did not cease thereby to be what he was, even the eternal Son of God. Well, that's, one, we don't talk like this. We don't hear things like this today. This is not kind of high on the list of what people are sitting down thinking about. That's sad. Why is that sad? I think Owen is saying, look, this is the stuff that brings us closer to having our minds and hearts melted in wonder at who God is and what he's done for us in his Son, Jesus Christ. That divine perfection took on fallible human nature and yet mysteriously never ceased to be divine perfection. Two natures in Jesus Christ. Thinking about that moves our heart in wonder and gratitude in what God has done to reconcile us as rebels to himself. Just a profound truth. This is why we ought to be reading older writers like John Owen and the Puritans. And look, if I could just encourage you guys who are chiming in right now, usually I do this Instagram live on the Greenbelt Baptist Church page, but if you're following in here this morning, I would just encourage you, if you're not a part of a church that is regularly wrestling with these deep theological issues, I would encourage you to talk to your pastors about doing this, or at least finding a church that really is wrestling with what it means for God to be God and for Christ to take on humanity. Those truths matter in essential ways to our salvation. And insofar as we get those truths wrong, we get a lot of other things wrong. We want to be thoughtful Christians who dig deep, and that often means that we're wrestling with some deep truths. We don't want to be Christians who are constantly operating at third grade Sunday school level. We want to grow some theological muscles, because it's those theological muscles that help us deal rightly with an incredibly tough world. And I'm grateful for men like John Owen and their works being published. So I'll see you guys again next Friday, either on this page, and if not, probably on the Greenbelt Baptist Church Instagram page. If you enjoyed this, go ahead and follow Greenbelt Baptist Church every Friday. We are meeting at around 9:30 to read through, talk through, think through John Owen and his book, The Glory of Christ. All right. Peace.